The chamber is open and full of whispers.
Before we dive in, check the link in the description if you want exclusive timelines, members-only videos you won't find on YouTube, all on our Patreon. The Marauder map had never done this before. James Potter stood at his desk in the study at Godric's Hollow. The parchment spread across both palms, and what moved through him was not the familiar warmth of the map's enchantment, that living, breathing awareness keyed to his blood, but something colder, closer to revulsion, as though the parchment itself was pulling away from what it was being forced to show. In the entrance corridor below, a footprint with no name. The map named everyone. It had been built that way, keyed to every soul who had ever walked Hogwarts corridors during the years they made it, expandable by intention, updated by blood magic that the four of them had spent 2 years refining in secret. It did not produce gaps. It did not show anonymous footprints. Except, now it did. One set of prints moving up the path toward the house, and where the name should have been, there was only white parchment, slightly translucent, as though the ink had tried to form and thought better of it. James was already moving before he finished reading. The Patronus left his wand as a stag, fully formed, antlered, burning silver through the dark air of the study. It was through the wall in under a second, carrying 3 words in the Marauder code they had never actually needed to use until now. The stag runs. He went to the landing and did not call for Lily, because Lily was already in Harry's room with the door closed, and he could hear her voice through the wood. Not the words, only the rhythm of them, the cadence of an ancient text she had been memorizing for 3 months. She had known tonight was coming before he had. He positioned himself on the upper landing, back to the wall, wand in hand, and breathed, not in fear, because fear had been processed and filed 2 years ago when the war made it a luxury, but into the architecture of the moment, where the stairs turned, where the light fell, where the door below was weakest. The wards cracked at the turn of the hour, not shattered, cracked, a sound like old ice giving way beneath too much weight, structural and deep. And then the front door came off its frame with a force that was not physical but magical, the kind of force that simply decided the door was no longer relevant. Lord Voldemort entered the house. He was tall in the way of things that had shed everything unnecessary. No warmth, no weight, only the vertical fact of him, moving up the stairs with the patience of a man who had never needed to hurry because nothing had ever been fast enough to matter. He reached the landing and found James Potter standing in his way. Not fleeing, not backing toward the nursery. Standing, wand raised, with the expression of someone who had chosen his position and intended to hold it. Voldemort raised his wand. The curse that came from the left took him entirely by surprise. Sirius had felt the wards crack through the blood link, a cold hook behind his sternum, sudden and absolute, before the silver stag ever reached him. He was already descending through the night sky on his broom, when the Patronus arrived, banking hard toward Godric's Hollow, and pushing every knot of speed the broomstick had to give. He entered through the back passage James had built into the house during the paranoid months before Harry was born, accessible only to someone who knew the ward's 4th layer, and came up the servants' stairs, 2 at a time. The Marauder lock had been invented at 16 on a Hogwarts corridor while trying to contain a prank that had escalated well beyond its intentions. The principle was simple. Petrificus Totalis cast simultaneously from 2 positions no single shield could cover, creating a crossfire a target could block from one angle, but never both. Against a standard opponent, it was excessive. Against Lord Voldemort, it was, at best, a stagger. But a stagger was what they needed. The curse went wide. It struck the wall above the nursery door and scorched the plaster black, filling the corridor with the acrid smell of burnt magic. Voldemort turned toward Sirius. James cast again from behind. The shield charm absorbed it, but the force drove him back a step, and in that half-second of divided attention, that impossible window, he was not watching the nursery door. The nursery door opened. Lily Potter did not run. She walked out with Harry held against her chest and her eyes fixed on Voldemort, her lips already moving on words that were not English and not any language that had been spoken in that corridor since before the Ministry of Magic existed. Voldemort saw her. Something in him went very still. "Step aside," he said. His voice was always soft, the softness of something that had not needed volume in a very long time. Lily did not step aside. She stepped forward. She spread her left arm, the one not holding Harry, and spoke the final words of the Willow's End charm in a voice completely steady, which cost her something she would never fully account for. Because she could feel James in the edge of her vision, and she could not look at him and she could not stop. My life for his life, my death for his death, my love for his love, let what is offered be seen by stone and fire and blood, and let it be enough. What came out of her was not a spell in any Hogwarts sense. It was older than that. The magic of absolute intention made structural, the willingness to die, fully meant, fully witnessed, transmuted by the ancient law of sacrifice into something that moved outward from her chest the way light moves from its source. Not aimed, not cast, simply present. She had spent 3 months understanding what it was she was offering. Not her death for Harry's future, but her willingness to die, interposed completely between her son and his destruction. The ancient magic did not require her to perish. It required only that she mean it without reservation. She meant it without reservation. Voldemort raised his wand. He had run out of time. The flash was not green, it was gold. Deep, sustained gold with actual weight behind it, pressing against the walls and making the house shudder on its foundations. When it vanished, the corridor was dark, and the smell of burnt magic had been replaced by something older and harder to name. Lord Voldemort was not there. What fled through the broken front door was not a man. It was the absence of one, a cold, formless displacement of air that moved fast and low, and was gone into the night before the last echo of the house's shuddering stopped. James found her on the nursery floor. Harry was asleep against her shoulder, the lightning bolt scar on his forehead red at the edges, but shallow. A mark, not a wound. Lily had her back against the crib, and her eyes open, and was staring at the broken window, through which the first firework of someone's premature celebration was already rising over the Muggle street. James sat beside her. Neither of them spoke for a long time. "They think we're dead," he said. "I know," she said. The pause that followed was the one everything else would be built on. James looked at his son's sleeping face, the painted constellation crib, the scorched wall, the broken window, and the life they had made here that was now visible from the street. He looked at all of it. Then, "Let them mourn us," he said, "until we're ready." They left Godric's Hollow under the cloak of invisibility, James with Harry against his chest, Lily managing the hem with one hand, Sirius walking behind them with careful deliberateness, performing a model of restraint he would never admit cost him anything. Potter Manor received them through gates that opened before James touched them. The living ward recognized the Lord's return. Inside, the great hall, vaulted and dark, and lit only by the hearth, which had been burning continuously for 3 generations of Potters, and which added a log without being asked as they crossed the threshold. The ceiling was painted, an entire sky rendered in pigments mixed with genuine starlight, every constellation moving in real time with the actual heavens above the Scottish Highlands. Harry woke as they stepped into the hall. His eyes opened, green like lilies, set in James's face, and he looked up at the ceiling and raised one hand toward it. His magic moved before he knew it was moving, the way infant magic does, without structure, without intention, only the pure instinct of something recognizing what it belongs to. One star brightened. Just one, in the upper left quadrant, a single point of light gaining half a magnitude and holding there. James looked at it. His throat did something he chose not to examine. "That's your grandfather's constellation," he said quietly, to the child already drifting back toward sleep. "He put it there the night your father was born." Harry's hand dropped. His eyes closed. By dawn, Sirius and Remus were at the table beside the hearth, and the morning edition of the Daily Prophet lay between them, with its headline in the largest type the paper had ever used. "He who must not be named, defeated. Potter's dead, the boy who lived orphaned." James Potter sat in the chair nearest the fire with his son asleep on his chest. The newspaper was wrong about everything except its first clause, and in the great hall of Potter Manor, under a painted sky where one star burned brighter than it had the night before, something that would come to be called the Marauder Regency quietly, irrevocably began. The map on Lily's study wall had no empty spaces left. Every surface had been claimed. Genealogical charts pinned in overlapping layers, arithmetic equations running across sheets of parchment spellotaped together at the edges because single sheets had stopped being sufficient. 18 months in, bloodline resonance diagrams branched and split and reconnected across 4 generations. Horcrux location estimates marked in red, revised in black, revised again in a third color, she had taken to calling provisional certainty, which Remus said was not a real category, and which she used anyway. At the center of the main wall, above the fireplace, was the secondary prophecy. She had found the transcript in the ministry archive through a contact she had cultivated carefully over 2 years. A junior records clerk who believed he was helping compile an anonymous research history of Trelawney's early work, and who had no reason to look closely at what he was copying. The transcript arrived by owl, with Dumbledore's own annotations in the margins. Secondary. Unverified. Not actionable. 3 dismissals and 6 words, from a man who had built a decade of strategy on the first prophecy, and apparently found the second inconvenient. The Sage of Raven rises as the Sword of Stag falls, neither whole without the other. The house divided is the dark's only hope. United, they become the unbroken. Lily had read it once the night it arrived, set it face down on the desk, and stood at the window looking at the Highland dark for a long time. Then she picked it up, pinned it to the center of the wall, and started eliminating candidates. 17 over 2 years. Arithmetic profiles that didn't hold, magical signatures that read as standard accidental ignition, rather than the specific resonance she was looking for. The Ravenclaw line had gone dormant in stages. Not a clean break, but a slow diminishment across 3 generations of squib births, the magic thinning rather than stopping, which meant its resurgence would look different from ordinary Muggle-born accidental magic. More coherent, more intentional. A child whose magic moved like organized thought rather than unfiltered emotion. She had been looking for a particular kind of signal. On a Tuesday in February, Remus set his arithmetic model in front of her at the secondary desk, his reading glasses pushed up his forehead, his tea cold. He had been running the model since autumn, and the result had stabilized 3 days ago, and he had checked it 4 times before bringing it to her, because that was how Remus operated. Bloomsbury, he said. London. Female, approximately 3 years old. Lily checked the final decimal. It agreed with him. She circled a point on the city map in the lower left corner of the wall. Then she went to get her coat. Bloomsbury in February wore the gray of a city that had been cold long enough to stop apologizing for it. Lily wore Muggle clothes without effort. She was Muggle-born, and London sat differently in her body than the Highland manner did. Easier, more automatic, the way a mother tongue always does regardless of how fluent you become in other languages. She found the bookshop in 20 minutes. Small, independent, with a handwritten sign and a window display arranged by someone who genuinely cared about arrangement. She bought a coffee from across the street and stood with it untouched. The signal came 43 minutes later. Not dramatic. A warm pulse, golden white, visible only through the trained attention that 2 years of Horcrux resonance work had developed in her, coming from low in the shop near the children's section, lasting approximately 2 seconds, and then simply over. Lily crossed the street. Through the window she saw a small girl standing at the picture books on the lowest shelf. An extraordinary quantity of brown hair, entirely untamed. The books were rearranging themselves, not randomly, but by color, warm to cool, moving through the spectrum in the correct optical sequence, red through to violet. The girl stepped back and examined her work with the expression of someone checking arithmetic. Then she turned around, and Lily saw Hermione Granger's face for the first time, and around the child, visible only through the charm Lily had been running for months, was a shimmer. Faint, blue-silver like moonlight on a library shelf at midnight. Not ordinary accidental magic. Something older, waking from a long sleep. Lily went home and did not approach the Grangers for 6 months. She watched instead. Tuesday mornings at the park across from their house, Hermione at 3 with picture books her mother brought, lips moving around words with the focus of someone who had decided reading was a system and systems could be mastered. An April school open day where Lily stood at the back of a gymnasium and watched Hermione ask a question that made the nursery teacher pause. And the pause itself was a kind of answer. A coffee shop in June. Hermione across from her mother arranging sugar packets into a spiral, then a grid, then something that wasn't quite arithmetic notation, but followed the same underlying logic. A mind reaching for structure it didn't yet have vocabulary for. Jean Granger watched her daughter do this, with an expression Lily recognized immediately, wonder sharpening against worry, the expression of a parent who loves their child completely and cannot make the world wide enough to contain them. Jean already knew. She simply didn't have the word yet. On a Tuesday evening in late summer, Lily knocked on the door of the white townhouse with the green front door. She carried a children's novel, one Hermione didn't have because Lily had checked the bookshop's loyalty records. She wore exactly what she was, a young mother with something important to say. Dan Granger opened the door, a precise, composed man with the manner of someone who took things seriously as a first response rather than a last resort. He looked at Lily for one measured moment. Then he stepped back and held the door open. Hermione was on the sitting room floor with a book, perfectly still, utterly absorbed. She looked up when Lily came in. She did not go back to the book. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Lily told them everything, what magic was, what Hermione was. She healed a hairline crack in the far wall without touching it, and Dan Granger tracked the repair with the methodical attention of a man updating his model of how the world functioned. Then asked his first question, precise and exactly right. How long has she been doing this? The books in the shop were in February, Lily said. Before that, smaller things, a mobile that rearranged itself, a book that turned its own pages. I noticed the mobile, Jean said, very quietly. Lily laid out what she had found. The old magical bloodline that her arithmetic analysis suggested had resurfaced in Hermione, the secondary prophecy she had been tracking for 2 years. She had found a historical connection through the Dagworth Granger family name, to an ancient wizarding line, she explained. Speculative, she said plainly, not fully proven, but pointing toward something real. She did not use the word destiny. She said instead, "Your daughter is something the world has not seen in a very long time, and the world is not ready for her. I can help get her ready for it." Dan asked the right questions in the right order. What the danger was, what it meant in practical terms to be taken under the protection of the House of Potter, whether they were being asked to give their daughter away. Lily was honest about each one. The wizarding world was dangerous, politically fractured, still traumatized by a war it was pretending to have recovered from. Hermione would be a target for people whose entire identity rested on the belief that blood determined worth. But she would also have protection that could make that danger navigable, and she would not lose her parents. The Grangers would visit. Hermione would know where she came from. This was not adoption replacing them. It was Hermione's world becoming large enough to contain both. Jean Granger had said almost nothing for 2 hours. Then, "What is she to you?" Jean asked. "Not to the mission, not to the family name, to you, personally." Lily was quiet for a moment. "The daughter I didn't know I'd been looking for," she said. Jean studied her the way one mother reads another. Not the words, but the thing beneath the words, whether it was real. It was. Jean had learned exactly what real looked like. The Grangers asked for a week. They took 3 days. They said yes. Harry's 3rd birthday fell in the last days of July, and the Great Hall of Potter Manor had been prepared for weeks. Every silver candlestick the house owned had been lit, not conjured flames but real ones, in every holder. James had been awake since before dawn and looked it. Sirius was stationed at the foot of the stairs with his hand loosely on Harry's shoulder, theoretically managing the situation. Lily stood at the center of the hall with the hearth fire behind her, the fire that had burned without interruption for 4 generations of Potters, part of the manor's living magic the way the ward structure was part of it, old and breathing and aware. Hermione Granger walked across the great hall toward her, 3 years old, a white dress her mother had packed in her overnight bag. She looked at the floating candles with the same expression she had given the color-sorted picture books 6 months earlier, the look of someone confirming the world had organized itself into legible patterns and finding this satisfying. Then she looked at Lily, crossed the remaining floor, and when Lily extended her hand, Hermione took it with both of hers and did not let go. The ritual words, the golden light, the hearth fire rising and then settling. The gold star appeared on Lily's wrist first, then on Hermione's, small, precise, permanent. The living ward extended itself, recognized the new signature, accepted it. Then something crossed the room at speed. Harry, who had been theoretically under Sirius's supervision, had broken free with the total commitment of a 3-year-old who has identified something happening and decided to be part of it. He crossed the hall in seconds, shoved his wrist into the edge of the golden light, and held it there with an expression of absolute determination. The mark on his wrist was silver, not gold. The heir's mark, a Potter modification the ritual had never produced before, because it had never been asked to. The living ward paused, the way old magical systems pause when something unexpected is working correctly. Then it accepted all 3. James Potter, watching from the far end of the hall, made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else, and turned away briefly toward the wall. When he turned back, Sirius was sitting on the stairs with his elbows on his knees looking at the ceiling. Remus had his hand over his mouth. Lily was holding both children, Harry on her left, Hermione on her right, the gold and silver marks visible on their small wrists where they pressed against her. Later, when both children were asleep, Hermione in the room that had been James's sister's, Harry in the chair beside the bed with his silver-marked wrist resting near hers, James and Lily stood in the doorway looking at them. "Dumbledore chose one child to carry the world," Lily said quietly. James looked at his children for a long moment. "I chose 2 children to share it," she said. James did not start Harry's training with wands. He started with a stone, an ordinary piece of granite from the manor's grounds, gray, slightly flat on one side, the kind of stone that had been a stone for a very long time and had opinions about continuing to be one. He set it on the practice room floor in front of 4-year-old Harry, sat back on his heels, and said, "This stone wants to be something else. Your job is to find out what." Harry looked at the stone. He looked at his father. He looked at the stone again with the expression of someone who suspects he is being tested and has not yet decided whether to take the bait. He took the bait. He spent 3 days with the stone, carried it to meals, brought it to bed. On the 3rd morning, sitting cross-legged on the practice room floor, with his eyes closed and his face arranged in the concentration of a child who has committed completely to a task, the stone turned, briefly, for approximately 4 seconds, into a bright copper coin. Harry dropped it immediately. It was hot. "Good," James said. Why was it hot? Harry considered this with appropriate seriousness, because it wanted to be a coin from a place where coins are made in fire. James looked at his son for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the door, went into the corridor, leaned against the wall, and was quietly undone for approximately 30 seconds. Then he went back in. "Good," he said again. "Now find out what it wants to be when it's not a coin." Hermione's first transfiguration was different in almost every way. She was 4 years old. She had spent her first year at the manor reading everything Lily would let her touch. Most things, plus several things Lily had not specifically authorized but decided not to confiscate on the grounds that a child who read alchemical theory for pleasure at age 4 was going to be fine. She sat in front of her stone with a notebook open beside her and a pencil in her hand, and she spent 40 minutes writing down everything she knew about crystals, their structures, formation conditions, which were produced by heat and which by pressure, before attempting anything. The stone became a pyrite cube, precise, dimensionally accurate. On the first attempt, she was 4 years old. James told Sirius about it over dinner that evening, and Sirius poured himself a considerably larger glass of whiskey than the occasion strictly required, and was quiet for a long time. "Both of them," Sirius said finally. "Both of them," James confirmed. "We're going to need more stones." The years organized themselves around skill, combat transfiguration in the mornings, theory in the afternoons, dueling and ancient charms in the early evenings, when the west windows turned the practice room amber. Remus and Lily shared the theory sessions, covering magical core theory, arithmetic prediction, rune work in Elder and Younger Futhark, and the history of what they were teaching, which was longer and stranger and more consequential than any standard curriculum had ever suggested. Lily taught magic as a language. Hermione grasped this immediately. She was learning 3 languages simultaneously by age 5, English, French at Jean Granger's insistence, and Latin from the grimoire, and the idea that magic had grammar, syntax, an underlying structure that could be parsed and annotated, fit her mind like a key in a lock. Harry learned it differently. He learned the way he'd learned what the stone wanted, by asking. His magic was intuitive, in a way that was not imprecision, but a different mode of precision. He felt when something was right before he could articulate why, which meant he moved faster and needed Hermione to explain it to him afterward, so he understood what he'd done. She always could. This became, over years, a rhythm between them. Harry acted, Hermione annotated, and together they understood things neither would have reached alone. Remus judged them ready for the Patronus charm when they were 12. After years of preparation and careful escalation, he introduced it not as a milestone, but as a technical problem, explaining the mechanics over 3 sessions before they attempted anything. He was clear-eyed about the difficulty. Even accomplished adult witches and wizards often could not produce a corporeal Patronus, and they should not expect to. The first attempts produced wisps of silver mist, thin and formless. This was exactly what Remus told them to expect. It took weeks of consistent practice before the mist began to hold shape, and longer still before the shapes held fully. Harry's, when it finally came, was a stag. Lily was at the back of the practice room, and she had known, in some way she couldn't explain, that it would be. What she hadn't anticipated was that when it solidified, when the silver animal moved through the room with the ease of something that had been waiting to exist, the room went quiet in a way that had weight to it. The weeks of mist, of effort, of failure and return, all of it was in that moment, and the moment was worth all of it. Hermione's followed 3 days later. Then it appeared. An otter, solid and bright, weaving through the air with complete confidence. The room went quiet again in a different way. Remus excused himself and went into the corridor. Lily followed him. They stood together against the wall without speaking, which was its own kind of language between people who had known each other long enough. "Moony," Lily said. "Give me a moment," Remus said. His voice was steady, his face was not. She gave him the moment. Sirius's training philosophy ran alongside James's in productive opposition. Where James taught with the patience of someone transmitting a 9th-century inheritance, Sirius taught dueling the way he approached most things, with personal enthusiasm that occasionally concerned the other adults in the room. "Your opponent expects their academy education," he told them, in their 3rd serious year of dueling practice. "Give them something that wasn't in the curriculum. The winning move is always the one they haven't catalogued." He brought a professional duelist to assess them, a former Order member, competent and unimpressed by children on principle, who stated this plainly. He had been asked to demonstrate a multi-target spell sequence for them to analyze. He was halfway through when the practice floor transfigured. Harry had not meant to do it. He had simply been watching the stone tiles and noticing what they wanted to be under high-energy spellfire, and what they wanted to be was a boulder. They became one. It rolled directly at the duelist with considerable momentum and no malice whatsoever. The duelist ran. The boulder stopped against the far wall. Harry examined his work. "I didn't mean to do that," he said. "Did you notice it was going to happen?" Sirius asked, maintaining a very particular facial expression. The floor wanted to be something heavy. The spell gave it permission. "That," Sirius said, "is either the most dangerous or the most useful thing I've ever heard, and I genuinely cannot decide which." The duelist did not return. Sirius logged the session as assessment. Complete. The identity lessons happened in the evenings in the Great Hall, in the years when the children were old enough to sit still and listen and argue back. James explained the political landscape the way a general explains terrain. Not as abstraction, but as features with implications. The Wizengamot and its voting structures. The Ministry and its fractures. The Death Eaters who had bought their way back to respectability with claimed coercion and enough gold. The Malfoy family as a case study in how power outlasts the cause that justified it. He told them about blood prejudice without softening it, because softening it would not prepare them for it. He told them what Hermione would be called and what assumptions would be made about Harry, and what the correct response to both was, not fury but precision, the kind that made fury irrelevant. "The world you're walking into has decided blood determines worth," he said. "We're going to walk in there and demonstrate clearly that it determines nothing. But you have to be so good they can't argue. They'll want to argue. They'll look for every opening." "Can you be exceptional enough to close every one?" Hermione said. "I already am." She said it without arrogance. It was an assessment delivered with the same confidence she gave arithmetic results. Not pride, simply accuracy. She was exceptional. Pretending otherwise would have been the actual arrogance. Harry said, "Together. One word, no elaboration needed." James looked at his children, 11 years old, sitting side by side at the great hall table with the Marauder map on the wall behind them, and the painted sky above, and 10 years of preparation in their hands like something built carefully enough to last. "Right answer," he said. Platform 9 3/4 on the 1st of September had the atmosphere of a place that understood its own significance. The steam, the scarlet engine, the controlled chaos of 100 families saying goodbye when they know the person leaving is going somewhere that will change them. The Marauder Regency arrived in 2 groups. Harry, Hermione, Sirius, and Remus went through the barrier first. Sirius moved through the platform with the ease of someone who had spent a decade being Lord Black in private, and was entirely comfortable taking it public. Remus was nobody in particular, which was how Remus preferred it, and how he was best deployed. They got the trunks loaded, and were aboard the express with the compartment door closed, before the second group came through. James and Lily Potter stepped onto the platform as the clock approached 11. The reaction moved through the crowd in stages, the way recognition does when the thing being recognized has been filed under impossible and must now be refiled under something else entirely. A witch near the barrier turned first, mid-sentence, and stopped speaking. The man beside her turned to see what she was looking at. A child tugged a sleeve. An older wizard dropped his cup. Then, from somewhere near the center of the platform, James, and the platform went quiet. They were 11 years older. James had a scar across his jaw from the night the front door came off its frame. Pale and settled, a line his face had grown around. Lily's red hair was longer, pulled back. They were dressed in Potter family formal robes, deep green with silver, the stag of the Potter crest at the breast pocket, robes that communicated through tailoring alone, that the people wearing them had not come to ask permission for anything. They walked the length of the platform. Not quickly, not slowly, with the pace of people returning to something they own, not in arrogance, but with the certainty of those who have been away long enough to understand precisely what they came back for. Cornelius Fudge was on the platform for a goodwill photograph with the incoming class, which was the kind of thing Cornelius Fudge did, because he understood that being seen mattered more than being competent, and had built an entire career on that principle. He saw James Potter and went the color of old chalk. "Potter, this isn't you're supposed to be." "Dead?" James said pleasantly. "Not warm, not cold. The temperature of someone who has rehearsed this conversation for 10 years and finds the reality entirely manageable. We were protecting our son. You'll forgive the deception. You cannot simply. There will be questions. There will. You may direct them to our solicitor." James moved past him. "Lord Sirius Black, he's already aboard the express." Fudge opened his mouth, then closed it. James Potter had already moved on. Inside the train, a round-faced boy named Neville Longbottom stood in the corridor looking lost, his toad Trevor already missing. Hermione stepped around 3 trolleys to help him look, found Trevor inside a chocolate frog box for reasons that remained unclear, and Neville looked at her with the gratitude of someone who had been waiting for a competent person to arrive. "Are you starting first year?" he asked. "Yes," Hermione said. "Sit with us." And that was how Neville Longbottom, whose parents had been tortured into permanent unconsciousness by Death Eaters, who were now either in Azkaban or hiding behind claimed Imperius, and who had grown up in his grandmother's house learning to live with an inherited grief he had not chosen, found himself in a compartment with Harry Potter and Hermione Granger Potter, heading toward the school his parents had loved, with something that felt for the first time like his particular kind of people. He sat very straight, as though the situation required formality, and within 20 minutes was laughing at something Harry had said about Sirius's approach to defensive strategy. A red-haired boy appeared at the compartment door mid-journey, introduced himself as Ron Weasley with the directness of someone who had 6 older brothers and had stopped being self-conscious about strangers by age 4, and stayed for the rest of the journey. He played Exploding Snap with Harry, and lost cheerfully and improved considerably by the 3rd game. He ate most of the sweets trolley, asked Hermione what she was reading with genuine curiosity rather than performance, and by the time the Hogwarts Express pulled into Hogsmeade Station, had given all 3 of them the effortless impression that he had known them for years. The Great Hall of Hogwarts, the floating candles, the enchanted ceiling showing the September night sky with a clarity that no actual atmosphere could match. Dumbledore sat at the staff table with the attentiveness of a man who had presided over the ceremony for 4 decades and was mildly fond of it. He was composing the first line of his welcoming speech when McGonagall called the first name. Granger, Hermione, the girl with the extraordinary brown hair, walked to the stool and placed the sorting hat on her own head with the confidence of someone executing a planned step in a procedure. On her wrist, visible to anyone looking, was a small gold star. Several people in the hall were looking. The hat was quiet for 3 seconds. "Interesting," it said privately, inside her thoughts. And she heard it clearly, which startled her. A mind like a very well-organized library. Loyalty layered under it all. Stronger than you know. Yes, this one isn't difficult. Gryffindor. Hermione walked to the Gryffindor table, sat, and exchanged a glance with the empty seat beside her, confirming an arrangement. Potter, Harry, the Great Hall did not go quiet. It erupted. Recognition moved table by table as the name landed, and people understood what it meant, and then understood that the boy standing at the front of the hall was not supposed to exist. Harry Potter had died at Godric's Hollow. He was a commemorative plaque in the Ministry atrium. He was not supposed to be 11 years old with a lightning bolt scar and the expression of someone mildly interested in the proceedings. The hat fell over his eyes. "Ah," it said, and then was silent for long enough that the hall, which had been loud, went oddly still. Harry felt the hat's attention moving through him, curious, thorough, pausing on things the way a searcher pauses when finding something unexpected. "There's something here that wasn't put in by you," the hat observed. "Cold, old, not yours. And underneath it, courage, loyalty, and a mind that asks the right questions before it acts. You could go far in Slytherin with the right guidance, but not Slytherin," Harry thought, clearly, without hesitation. The hat was quiet for one more moment, weighing, reading the full depth of what sat before it. Then, Gryffindor. Harry walked to the table and sat beside Hermione. "That took a while," she observed. "It was thorough," Harry said. The Hufflepuff table looked concerned. "I noticed." At the staff table, Severus Snape was looking at the wall behind the Gryffindor section. He had been looking at that wall since the name was called, using every year of hard-earned professional discipline to keep his face saying nothing. At the far end of the table, Quirinus Quirrell was trembling more than usual. Dumbledore stood, slowly, with the manner of a man processing a calculation that had just produced an unexpected result. He looked at Harry, at Hermione, then at the gallery above the hall, where James and Lily Potter stood, and the entire student body turned to follow his gaze. James met Dumbledore's eyes across the candlelit space. He did not look hostile or afraid, or like someone who had spent 10 years hiding and been caught. He looked like a man who had spent 10 years preparing and had arrived. The distinction was total, and Dumbledore read it immediately. The decade of careful architecture, Harry positioned at the Dursleys, isolated and ignorant, set up for a sacrifice Dumbledore had always known was coming, had happened in a world where the Potters were dead. In this world, the Potters were standing in the gallery of the Great Hall in formal robes, with their children at the Gryffindor table, and the decade had happened somewhere else entirely, and whatever it had produced without him. "How long?" Dumbledore said quietly. "Not for the room, for the gallery." Lily looked at him from across the candles. "Long enough," she said. Draco Malfoy, at the Slytherin table, was watching Harry with an expression working hard to arrange itself into contempt, and arriving instead at the unease of someone who has just realized the room operates by different rules than the ones he prepared for. He had spent 11 years understanding exactly where he stood in any hierarchy. He did not know where he stood in this one. That uncertainty, more than anything else that had happened in the last 10 minutes, would keep him awake. The first month of term established the social landscape with the efficiency of systems that have been running long enough to know what they are. Harry and Hermione were clearly exceptional, not a matter of opinion but of record, visible to anyone who watched a Transfiguration class, where McGonagall set an exercise and 2 students completed it before she finished explaining the parameters. Then sat quietly and did not draw attention to the fact, which McGonagall noted and wrote 3 private lines about in her assessment journal. Flitwick owled Lily directly. His letter was 3 sentences. The first, too professional. The third said, "I have taught for 31 years, and I would like to understand, if you are willing to explain it, what you have done." Lily wrote back 4 pages. In the 3rd week of October, in a corridor outside the Charms classroom with 3 Slytherin prefects behind him, and Neville Longbottom who had been walking with Hermione and had stopped, Draco Malfoy made a pointed remark about Muggle-born witches and their suitability for wizarding education. He used a specific word, the old word, the one that functioned less as an insult than as a classification, delivered with the confidence of someone who had heard adults use it in formal settings and believed that made it legitimate. Hermione looked at him for exactly 1 second. Her expression was not anger, not hurt. It was the expression she wore when someone presented a problem less interesting than the one she had been working on. A brief assessment, a conclusion, a decision to move on. She turned and walked away. Draco had never had anyone simply walk away from him. He was still processing this 2 days later when, in the Slytherin common room, someone knocked on the wall. The entrance was password-protected behind blank stone. There was no knocker, no handle, no architectural feature suggesting knocking was something one did. Someone knocked anyway, 3 times, evenly spaced, entirely confident. The wall opened. Harry and Hermione walked in. Hermione looked around with the expression she wore in libraries, not social, simply taking inventory. The architecture was extraordinary. Older than the Gryffindor Tower by at least 2 centuries, the stonework different in quality and intention. The lake pressed against the windows in long green shapes, light filtering through in layers. She could sense the ward structure in the walls, old, largely intact, with one node near the west window showing the degradation of enchantments that had not been maintained by anyone who understood their original design. She opened her notebook. Harry addressed the room. Not Draco specifically. He looked at the assembled Slytherins with the attention of someone who knows that targeting an individual in front of their peers gives that individual an opportunity to perform. "I'm going to say something once," he said, "so we don't need to have this conversation again." The room listened. Even Draco listened. "There has been some confusion about the standing of myself and my sister. Hermione Granger is my sister under the vow of hearth and name, a Potter by all legal and magical definitions, bonded to our house by a ritual that predates the Ministry by 4 centuries. He paused. "The person who insults her insults the Potter line. I want to make sure that's been understood, because I believe some people in this room have been operating without that information." Draco's voice, when it came, was less steady than he intended. "You can't simply walk into our common room." "Hermione found a provision in the castle's founding records," Harry said. "A historical anomaly, formal shared ward access, established between founder-linked lines in the school's earliest years, sitting untouched in the archive for centuries with no one looking at it." He paused. "She found it 6 weeks ago." From the northwest corner of the room, where she had been examining the ward structure with professional attention, Hermione said without turning, "The degradation near the west window is worth addressing before it affects the moisture seal between this room and the lake. There's approximately a 60% chance of flooding within 3 years if it's left alone." She made a note. "The runic inscription above the mantelpiece is partial. I think the rest of it is behind the stone panel to the left. Has anyone tried opening that?" Nobody answered. "Interesting," Hermione said, and wrote something else down. Theodore Knott, in the chair to Draco's left, was working hard not to look impressed. The effort was visible, and it was failing. Harry turned back toward the wall. "One more thing," he said to the room. "Tell your father that Lord Potter and Lord Black have filed a motion in the Wisengamot. He'll want to read it before the session." They left. The wall closed. In the corridor, Hermione showed Harry the structural diagram she had been sketching while apparently examining the northwest corner. "The ward node is genuinely degrading," she said. "I'll leave the analysis with McGonagall. Not directly with the Slytherins. The students didn't design the problem. It's not their fault." She closed the notebook. "Besides, McGonagall will make sure it's fixed." From inside the common room, through the stone, came the sound of a room full of politically intelligent people updating their assessments simultaneously. Draco Malfoy's voice was audible briefly above the others. Then Theodore Knott said something that made the room go quiet again in a different way. A door that had been closed for a decade was developing very quietly, the beginning of a crack. Harry found the anomaly on Hermione's ward map, the architectural reconstruction she had been building since the second week of term, working from the castle's structural magic the way an archaeologist reads soil layers. By the end of October, it covered 3 sheets of parchment laid edge to edge and showed, among other things, a dense concentration of overlapping magical signatures at the base of a disused corridor on the 3rd floor, right-hand side. He told James at the first parental visit. James listened to the ward description and recognized the resonance from Lily's Horcrux research notes. Not a Horcrux, but the same category of heavily protected powerful object. He and Lily took 2 days. "It's Flamel's Philosopher's Stone," Lily said, setting down the last of the reference materials. "Dumbledore has moved it here from Gringotts." "Why here?" James said. He already knew he wanted to hear her say it. "He needs bait. And bait works better if you put it where the thing you're baiting has to come. In the same building where our children sleep." "Yes," Lily said. "And that." She picked up her coat. Dumbledore's office was warm with the accumulated presence of decades. Silver instruments on every surface, portraits of former headmasters in varying states of wakefulness. Fawkes on his perch, watching James with the sidelong attention of a creature that reads a visitor's magical signature before their face. James sat across from the desk, accepted the offered tea, did not drink it. I know it's being used as a trap. The silence Dumbledore offered was one of his techniques, the pause that invites the other person to overfill it. James had watched him deploy it for years from the outside and was entirely immune. He waited. "My son is not bait, Albus," James said. "The stone is protected." "By a three-headed dog that responds to music," James said. "By Devil's Snare, vulnerable to direct light. By Flitwick's key puzzle, solvable by anyone with reasonable seeking ability. By McGonagall's chess set, which requires strategic thinking. By Snape's potions riddle, solvable by anyone with a logic education. And by your mirror." He set down the untouched tea. Lily did the ward analysis from the Manor's scrying connection. It took her 4 hours. She is the finest ward reader in Britain. Dumbledore's face did the thing it did when arriving information required integration. A stillness, a slight repositioning. "James," Dumbledore said carefully, "Voldemort is a wraith looking for a host and an anchor. I know what Voldemort is. Lily has been tracking his Horcrux network for 9 years. James leaned forward slightly. "I am not here to debate strategy. I am here to tell you that the object you've placed in this building while positioning my son as its defender is leaving this building today." He placed a document on the desk. Potter family parchment, heavy, cream-colored, the kind that held a wax seal without cracking. The seal was dark green, the stag embossed deep into the wax. The language inside was formal and archaic, drawn from the school's founding charter that Lily had found in the Potter Library's archive copy, and flagged for exactly this purpose. Under the right of ancestral claim, established in the Charter of Hogwarts, any object placed within the school's walls for the purpose of using a founder lineage student as an instrument is subject to removal by the head of that founder lineage house. This notice constitutes formal invocation of that right by the Lord of the ancient and noble house of Potter. Dumbledore read it twice. "This right has not been invoked in 312 years, James said. Lily found the last precedent it held. Lily walked into Hogwarts at 2 o'clock that afternoon, through the front entrance, which the Founders' Compact gave her right of access to, as the lady of an ancient house with an enrolled child. She walked to the 3rd floor, with a ward dissolution sequence running at a low level in her left hand, invisible to anyone passing. The locked door. She took the layers apart from outside in, the sequence that prevented them from triggering each other. 4 minutes. The dog was asleep. Someone had left an enchanted harp playing. Practical, she thought, and also the protection's primary vulnerability. She stepped over the trapdoor and moved through what followed with the efficiency of someone executing a plan made the day before rather than improvising one now. The Devil's Snare she lit without a word, wandless, a sustained brightness from her palm. The keys she identified by enchantment age. The chess set she bypassed using the Founder's Passage right that the chess enchantment's parameters had never accounted for. The troll was already unconscious. She moved on. The mirror. She looked at it for 3 seconds, saw what everyone sees, the thing they most want, and looked at the frame instead, specifically the left edge, where the containment enchantment had a seam, the place where intent had shifted from hiding to protecting, leaving a gap the width of a careful hand. She reached into the seam, not through the mirror's face, and found the stone in the concealment pocket behind it. Warm, heavier than it looked, deep red, the color of something that had been the answer to a question for 6 centuries and had become entirely comfortable with that weight. She put it in her coat pocket. She left Dumbledore a note on the frame in her ordinary handwriting. "The stone is in the care of the House of Potter. We have contacted Nicholas Flamel. He is relieved. You may write to us if you have questions. Lily Potter." Dumbledore read the note before 4 o'clock. He sat in his chair for a long time afterward. The portraits watched him with the careful attention of painted people who had learned to read his silences. This one had a particular weight. Fawkes on his perch tilted his head at his wizard, made a sound not quite musical, and flew to the window to look out at the grounds, giving someone he loved the privacy of their own thoughts. The stone-shaped absence on his carefully constructed board was not, in itself, the problem. The problem was what it meant about who had placed it there, and how long they had been capable of it, and what else they had been doing in the decade he had spent believing he was managing the situation. He picked up a quill, set it down, picked it up again. He would need to substantially revise everything. Snape did not look at Harry Potter for 3 days after the sorting. This was not subtle. A potions professor who cannot look at his students is a potions professor who will miss something catching fire. But it was the best he could manage, which told Lily everything she needed to know. Severus Snape did not lose control of his professional surface. The fact that he was losing it in something as involuntary as the direction of his eyes meant the thing underneath was significant. She gave him a week. Then she sent a letter through McGonagall, formal, brief, requesting a meeting at his convenience. The formality was deliberate. She was not ambushing him. She was asking. The distinction mattered for what she needed the conversation to be. His reply came that same afternoon. One line. 9 o'clock, SS. The potions office at 9 in the evening had the character of a room that had absorbed years of solitary work. Ink and sulfur and the cold particular to Dungeonstone. A stack of first-year essays on the desk. A fire settled into itself. One chair on the student side of the desk that had been turned slightly, the desk no longer directly between them. He had thought about the arrangement of the room before she arrived. That also told her something. He opened the door. She walked in. He could not quite look at her face, which was different from not looking at Harry. That was avoidance managed distance. This was something older, something that predated management. She sat, she waited. Severus, she said. He flinched. Not the name, the voice, the cadence of Lily Evans saying his name the way she had said it when they were 9 years old by a river, and the world was a size they could both stand inside. He was not 9 years old. He had not been for a very long time. But the body remembers what the mind has filed away, and his body remembered that voice with an accuracy 30 years had not touched. She laid it out plainly, the only way she knew how to do it with him, and the only way that would work. She told him what she knew, not as a prosecution, but so they could stand on the same ground and talk about what was actually there. She knew he had heard the prophecy. She knew he had taken it to Voldemort. She knew he had spent 10 years afterward trying to make that right in the only way available to him, working for a man he served out of guilt rather than loyalty. I thought you were dead, he said, controlled in the manner of something being controlled with effort. For 10 years I thought, every day. I know, she said. I thought it was my fault. It wasn't your fault that Voldemort chose my home, she said. It was your fault that you gave him the reason. The silence lasted 30 seconds. A log shifted in the fire. Why are you here, he said. Not quite a question. My son is in your potions class, she said, and you haven't looked at him once in 3 days. And in the classes before that, when you could still make yourself look at him, I have 3 reports from Hermione indicating you took points from Gryffindor for things that didn't warrant it. I need to know whether that can change. He looks exactly like James. He has James's cheekbones, Lily said. He has my eyes. He has his own everything else, which is considerable, and which you would know if you looked at him. She held his gaze. I'm not asking you to like James Potter. James is capable of managing his own relationships. I'm asking whether you can separate what you see when you look at Harry's face from who Harry actually is. Snape was quiet. What is he? 11 years old, trained from the age of 4 by people who love him completely. He is... She paused, and it was not strategic. He is very good, Severus. He is kind in a way that isn't naive. He chose his sister when he was 3 years old by walking across a room and inserting himself into a ritual not designed to include him, because he decided he wanted a sister and saw no reason his wanting shouldn't be sufficient. She looked at him. He's also going to need every resource I can give him, and you are one of those resources. That's the other reason I'm here. She told him about the Horcrux in Harry's scar, what she had identified, what she had contained, and what she had not yet solved, the extraction problem, removing a soul fragment from a living host without killing the host. Something she had been working toward for 9 years, and which had reached the point where it required a potion's mind of the first order. He listened without interrupting. However much else had changed or been damaged, Severus Snape, in the presence of a genuine intellectual problem, became still and completely present. She watched it happen. The grief, the guilt, the 30 years of weight moving to the side to make room for the problem. You came to me because you need a potions master, he said. "I came to you because you are the finest potions master alive," she said, "and because you're the only person I know who has spent more time being angry at themselves than James did. And James eventually got over it." She let that sit. "I hoped you had too." Something moved through his face, not warmth exactly, the expression of a man who has been in pain so long the pain became the background of everything and who is now being asked to notice it might not be permanent. "I haven't been kind to your son," he said. "No. I know what he looks like," she said. "And I know what you see when you look at him. If you can separate those two things, you'll find someone worth knowing." She paused. "And the girl?" Something moved through his expression that was not quite humor, and not quite its absence. A fractional shift that in someone less armored would have been a smile. "She'll run circles around me," he said. "She'll run circles around you, thank you politely afterward, and ask if she can do it again," Lily said. "You'll either find her extraordinary, or you'll retire within the year. I know which I think it will be." He looked at his desk, the ungraded essays, the fire. "I'll help with the extraction," he said. "The Horcrux removal. I believe there's a substrate approach in the older literature, one that hasn't been fully explored. If the fragment is contained, a targeted disruption of its anchor." He stopped. "I'll write to you." "I know you will," she said. She stood, moved to the door. "Sev," she said. He looked up. "I missed you," she said. "When I thought the world was as simple as it was at 9 years old, beside the river, I missed my friend." He said nothing. She left. He sat in the potions office for a long time, with the essays ungraded and the fire settling lower, and 30 years of weight rearranged itself around him. Not gone, not lifted, but shifted. The way a burden shifts when someone has acknowledged that you have been carrying it. In the morning, he would grade the essays. He would look at Harry Potter in class. He would begin, in the evenings, his research into the substrate approach. Tonight he sat with the fire and the black lake outside the window, and did not move. Lily felt the diary the moment it crossed the school's ward boundary. A Tuesday evening in early September, the detection ward she had keyed to Horcrux resonance pulsing once, cold and clear, like a tuning fork struck against something wrong. She set down her quill, sat very still, read the signal's character, not the ring, that was contained, not the locket. This was the diary, the one she had tracked to the Malfoy family's magical signature years earlier, marked and waited on, because patience had always been the correct strategy. The diary had come to her. She wrote to Harry and Hermione that night. 2 sentences. "The object I flagged from the Malfoy collection has entered the school. Do not engage with it directly. I will explain at the weekend visit." Hermione's reply arrived by morning. 3 pages. She had already identified the carrier. Ginny Weasley was 11 years old, and she was disappearing by degrees. Hermione had noticed it in the 2nd week of term. Not dramatically, but in the cumulative way that things become visible when you pay the right kind of attention. The quality of Ginny's engagement in classes diminishing by small degrees. Her color wrong, her writing in a journal at odd hours with the absorbed intensity of someone who had found something that felt important and did not yet know that the feeling of importance was the trap itself. Ron noticed something was off with his sister before anyone else mentioned it to him, that particular sibling awareness that operates below conscious thought. And it was Ron who came to Harry quietly one evening and said, "She's not right. I don't know what it is, but she's not right," with the helplessness of someone who loves someone and cannot locate the problem. "We know," Harry said. "We're handling it." Ron looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded and sat back and trusted that, which was not naive, but earned. It was one of the most valuable things Ron Weasley possessed. James retrieved the diary on a Saturday morning while Ginny was occupied. Called to the Great Hall for a prefect matter, Remus arranged through Percy with the specific skill of someone who understood institutional choreography. James removed the diary from her bag and replaced it with a standard blank journal Lily had prepared with a warming charm on the cover so it would feel familiar. 4 minutes, total. Ginny returned and did not notice. Within a week her color was better. Within 2 she was eating properly and laughing again, and had told Ron 3 times that he was being ridiculous for asking if she was all right, which was itself the proof that she was. She never knew she had been carrying something that was eating her. The diary's unmaking took 3 months. Lily and Snape worked through the autumn on the substrate compound, an approach Snape had identified in literature predating the Ministry's classification system. from a period when soul magic had been studied openly rather than suppressed. A Horcrux was a soul fragment anchored to an object by the magical residue of violent murder. A compound tuned to disrupt that residue, applied at the correct temperature, activated by the correct rune sequence, would dissolve the anchor without destroying the object. Hermione developed the rune sequence. This was not something Lily had asked her to do. Lily had explained the theoretical problem at the October weekend visit, including the substrate approach and its gaps. And Hermione had listened with the total focused attention she gave things that genuinely interested her, structured, already moving. 3 weeks later, she delivered a 12-page document containing, among other things, an arithmetically verified rune activation sequence that closed the gap Snape had been working toward for 6 weeks. Snape read it twice. Then he wrote to Lily, "The sequence is correct. She found the approach I had been working toward for 6 weeks. She is 12 years old." Lily wrote back, "I know. Are you ready to concede the retirement question?" He did not reply to that, but in his next potions class he returned Hermione's practical assessment with a mark of outstanding and a single line of annotation. The runic integration on the substrate heating sequence was elegant. "Consider publishing when you are older." Hermione read it 4 times, then she added it to the notebook she kept of things worth remembering. The diary was unmade at Potter Manor in December, in the ritual room, with Lily performing the Fractura Anima sequence, Snape monitoring the substrate temperature, and Hermione's rune array providing the activation structure. The soul fragment dissolved in 47 seconds, not explosively, not dramatically, but with the character of something ceasing that had been going on too long. Afterward, the diary was simply leather and paper, old, slightly warped, entirely inert. 5 remained. Harry's scar was one of them. They did not discuss it at the Manor dinner table. They didn't need to. It was in every room without being said, the way important things are when the people who know them have decided to wait for the right time. In January of that year, Harry went down to the chamber. This was planned, discussed, approved after a conversation in the Manor's study that lasted 2 hours and ended with James saying, "If you're going in, I'm standing at the entrance." That is not a negotiation. Harry agreed without argument, which was itself a kind of maturity Lily noted and did not mention. James stood at the entrance, the bathroom sink that had been a sink for 1,000 years and was now open to a dark pipe, and maintained his composure through sheer force of will, while his son descended into a chamber built by a founder to house a creature that could kill with its eyes. The chamber was vast in the way of spaces built by people who understood that scale communicates intent. Cathedral high, stone columns carved as serpents, green light filtering through in layers that made the air feel like being underwater. Harry had descended twice before in practice runs, learning the space before he needed to use it. This time the space was occupied. He felt her presence before he saw her, ancient, awake, entirely aware of him. Then she moved, and the movement of 60 feet of basilisk was a sound like the earth adjusting its position, stone and scale and the weight of 1,000 years. Her eyes were closed. Harry stood at the midpoint of the chamber and spoke in the register his father had spent 2 years teaching him, not the raw instinctive parcel tongue carried in his scar, which he had and which operated on impulse, but the linguo bestia modification, from the Potter Grimoire, the diplomatic register that addressed serpents as interlocutors rather than animals. The distinction was fundamental. The scar's parcel tongue was a fragment of someone else's soul speaking through him. The diplomatic register was trained, deliberate, and his own. He kept the latter forward, and gradually the two found a working relationship, instinct and education beginning to operate together in a way that was, at last, genuinely his. "I come not as your master," he said. The words in the old tongue carried their own weight heavier than English, each one meaning precisely itself. "I come as the heir of your school. I wish to hear your counsel." The basilisk went still. Not the stillness of sleep, the stillness of thinking. Processing, weighing, reading the register he was using, and finding it correct in a way it had not been correct for 5 centuries. The diplomatic protocol encoded in the chamber walls was not a command structure. It was a recognition structure. It said, "I know what you are. I know what this place is. I am addressing you accordingly." She had been waiting for that address since the last person who knew it was alive. Harry spoke for 20 minutes. He explained what Tom Riddle had done with the chamber, what Slytherin had intended, the covenant of protection he was proposing, and its specific terms. The basilisk lowered her head by degrees. Not submission, acknowledgement. You speak the old protocol correctly, she said. Her voice in the serpent tongue was low and resonant, carrying the weight of something that had not spoken in a very long time, and found the act significant. The last heir who came here arrived with commands, not counsel. He used the protocol as a lever. You are using it as a door. There's a difference, Harry said. Yes, she said, there is. The covenant was agreed in the old form, spoken, witnessed by the chamber's stone, binding in the way that agreements between magical creatures and wizarding houses had been binding since before the ministry existed, and decided it had opinions about the matter. Her name, in the old register, was Verada, the keeper. Hermione descended 40 minutes later, with her notebook already open. Verada regarded this second arrival with a different kind of attention. More sideways, more measuring. Hermione looked back at her with the expression she wore facing library collections she hadn't previously had access to. The chamber's architectural history, Hermione said in English, which Harry translated. I have approximately 17 questions. Verada was quiet for a moment. The small one asks correctly, she said to Harry. She asks as though the answer matters beyond herself. It does, Harry said. Then I will answer. Tell her I remember the one who built this place. Tell her I remember when the four of them were still speaking to each other. Hermione, receiving the translation, wrote 4 words at the top of a fresh page. Primary source. Pre-schism Hogwarts. Then she looked up with the expression of someone who has just understood the scope of what is sitting in front of her and is reorganizing her questions in order of priority. She had brought extra pages. She was going to use all of them. Neville Longbottom, for his part, had been the one to notice Harry and Hermione had been gone from the common room for several hours. He hadn't said anything to anyone else. He had simply settled in the chair nearest the portrait hole and waited, with the quiet patience of someone who had learned early that you could not control what the people you trusted were walking into, only ensure you were present when they came back. They came back. He pretended he had been doing homework. Were you waiting? Hermione asked. No, Neville said. 2 inches of herbology essay completed, 3 hours of waiting time. Hermione looked at the essay. She looked at him. Thank you, she said. Neville looked at his essay. Didn't do anything? Yes, you did, Harry said. Lucius Malfoy arrived at Hogwarts in February. He came with the confidence of a man who had always found that confidence, correctly deployed, was sufficient to determine outcomes. He demanded a meeting regarding the unauthorized removal of personal property from his son's belongings. He used the phrase personal property 3 times in his letter. James was waiting for him in the entrance hall. Sirius was positioned slightly behind and to his left, the formal stance of a legal second, communicating to anyone who knew what they were looking at that this was not a social call. Lucius came through the doors with his cane and his practiced ease. He saw James Potter's face, and the ease recalibrated. The object you placed in a student's belongings, James said, has been identified, contained, and unmade. It was a Class A dark object. You have 2 choices. You may speak with Lord Black regarding formal charges we're preparing under Section 9 of the Dark Artifacts Statute, or you may leave this building and not return. You cannot simply— The Board of Governors voted in November, James said. Lord Black and I hold the majority. You are no longer a member of this board. He paused. And Lucius, the basilisk sends her regards. Lucius Malfoy did not know what this meant. He was a man who maintained composure partly by ensuring there were very few things he didn't understand in any given room. The thing he didn't understand was worse than any specific threat would have been, because a specific threat has a specific counter and uncertainty has none. He left. James Potter took his Wizengamot seat on a Thursday in early spring, 2nd year, walking in with Sirius. The chamber had the atmosphere of an institution that had been running long enough to believe its own permanence. Dark wood paneling, tiered seating arranged in a horseshoe, the Wizengamot seal in enchanted stone on the ceiling. 50 seats, most occupied by people who had spent varying amounts of the past decade doing varying amounts of nothing about various things that required doing. They noticed James and Sirius. Recognition moved through the chamber in a wave, some faces toward memory, some toward discomfort, some toward the careful blankness of people already calculating. Lucius Malfoy, 3 rows from the front, went through 3 distinct expressions in under 2 seconds and arrived at composed. James sat in the Potter seat and felt the chair recognize his magical signature. A small, old magic, the enchantment of a seat that that had been waiting for its lord. Sirius sat in the black seat, crossed his ankles, and looked around the chamber with the ease of someone who had been Lord Black in private for a decade and found the public version entirely manageable. When the procedural opening was complete, James stood. "I file a petition of prior conduct," he said. "Under Article 17 of the Wizengamot Charter, this petition constitutes a formal demand for investigation into any member of this chamber or ministry officer who served Lord Voldemort during the war and escaped consequence through claimed coercion or political arrangement." He set the petition on the record table, 43 pages, numbered, indexed, cross-referenced. "I additionally invoke the Founder's voice," he said, "under the pre-ministry charter right of the Peveril line, to prevent procedural challenge pending assignment to an investigative panel." The chamber went to the quiet of a room where 50 people are thinking fast, and not all of them are thinking the same thing. The Founder's voice had not been invoked in 300 years. The right was not disputed. It was simply so old that most current members had not known it existed until James Potter's letter to the chamber's legal office, sent 3 weeks prior, had politely requested confirmation that it remained on the books. The legal office confirmed it, in writing, with the slightly stunned quality of people who had just opened an archive they had never had reason to check. It remained on the books. It was legally inviolable. The petition was assigned to an investigative panel before the session ended. The petition named Lucius Malfoy first. The evidence: testimony from 3 former Death Eaters who had accepted Marauder Regency pardons in exchange for sworn, veritaserum verified accounts of Malfoy's wartime activities. Financial records from a Gringotts audit triggered under a House Potter financial claim against assets seized during the conflict. And Sirius's personal testimony, not as performance but as a Black family member who had attended pre-war gatherings where Lucius Malfoy had expressed his allegiances with the enthusiasm of someone who believed the outcome was certain. The imperious defense was Lucius's armor, and it was well constructed. It had worked once already in the chaotic aftermath of the war, when the ministry was too damaged and too grateful for peace to examine claimed coercion with any rigor. The investigative panel examined it with rigor. The financial records were decisive. A man under the Imperious curse does not make targeted donations to a political cause. A man under Imperious does not draft correspondence to ministry officials that aligns precisely with his lord's strategic objectives and predates in several cases those objectives becoming widely known. A man under Imperious does not purchase, through a third-party proxy, 3 Wizengamot seats, whose holders then vote in consistent block alignment with Death Eater-adjacent policy positions. Sirius gave his testimony without embellishment, describing in chronological specificity 3 gatherings at the Black family home in the pre-war years where Lucius Malfoy had spoken about Voldemort's objectives with personal investment. People under Imperious did not have personal investment. They had compliance. Compliance had a different quality from enthusiasm, and Lucius Malfoy had been enthusiastic. The panel deliberated for 2 hours. Lucius Malfoy was stripped of his Wizengamot seat and every appointed position. He was escorted from the chamber with the specific courtesy the ministry reserved for people being removed from power who still had enough social standing to make discourtesy politically inconvenient. He passed James on the way out. "This isn't over," Lucius said. James looked at him with the patience of someone answering a question they have already settled. "You are a man without a Wizengamot seat, without institutional power, and without Voldemort," he said. "What exactly do you imagine you're going to do?" Lucius said nothing. The Aurors moved him along. Dolores Umbridge's removal from the ministry was quieter. She was a senior undersecretary, a position accumulated through the talent of making herself useful to whoever held power, requiring no particular intelligence but considerable attention to the distribution of authority and a complete absence of principle. She had been writing internal memos for years, advocating for the registration and restriction of Muggle-born magical people. Memos detailed enough to function less as policy proposals than as operational blueprints. These memos were in the ministry archive, filed correctly, cross-referenced, never acted on, never removed because removing them would have required someone to acknowledge they existed. Sirius had them pulled. Under Lord Black's right of record access, a right attaching to ancient House seats, allowing members to review ministry documentation relevant to House interests, the memos were extracted and entered into the public record on a Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, 3 senior ministry officials had sent private correspondence to Umbridge, suggesting she consider her position. By Thursday, She had sent her resignation to the minister's office, citing family health concerns. The letter was accepted without comment. She was never employed in public office again. 3 weeks, Sirius told Lily over dinner at the manor. The memos were already there, Lily said. You just made them visible. That's the part I keep coming back to, Sirius said. All of it, Lucius, Umbridge, the whole apparatus. It was sitting there in the open. No one was looking at it correctly, or no one with the standing to act on what they saw, James said. Same problem, Lily said. Different angle. Remus, listening from the end of the table with his tea, said, What did it feel like from inside the chamber, when you invoked the Founder's voice? James thought about it. Like watching someone realize the floor has a different load-bearing structure than they thought, he said. They've been arranging the furniture a certain way for years. Then someone shows them where the actual supports are. And you're one of the supports, Remus said. He looked at Sirius. Sirius raised his glass. Simply. The gesture of two people who had been in a long thing together and had reached the end of a particular stage of it. Snape's intelligence arrived 3 weeks before the Beauxbatons carriage, and the Durmstrang ship were due at Hogwarts, during Harry's 4th year. 4 sentences. The last one mattered. The mechanism they are building requires a named champion. The goblet cannot be deceived by an age line. It can, however, be preempted by prior submission under older law. Lily found the provision in 11 minutes. The sovereign heir submission from the tournament's founding compact, predating its current form by a century. An ancient house sovereign could name their heir as champion directly, bypassing standard selection. The provision had not been used in over 300 years. It had never been formally repealed because it existed in the founding compact rather than the tournament rule set, a jurisdictional distinction the committee had never needed to care about until now. The Goblet of Fire was bound to magical law rather than ministry policy. It was older than the ministry. It would recognize the provision because it had no architecture for not recognizing it. Lily wrote 2 submission letters before dinner. She sealed them with the Peveril crest and sent them to the Goblet's custodian at the Department of Magical Games and Sports, where they would be logged, dated, and legally binding before the goblet arrived at Hogwarts. Then she wrote back to Snape, Thank you. Handled. Watch Moody carefully. The magical signature is inconsistent. The goblet sat in the entrance hall for 3 days. Harry and Hermione watched Fred and George Weasley's aging potion attempt on the first evening, a plan involving simultaneous entry that produced 2 extremely confused, identically bearded 17-year-olds being ejected from the age line with considerable velocity. Fred landed against a suit of armor. George sat up immediately and attempted to look dignified. Elegant, Hermione said. Technically, they made it past the line, Harry said, for approximately 1 second. The principle was sound. The principle was entirely unsound, and you know it. Harry watched George retrieve his brother's hat with a summoning charm from inside the age line, and felt something settle warmly in his chest. The particular ordinary pleasure of watching people he liked fail entertainingly at things they knew were impossible, and do it anyway. Champion selection on Halloween evening filled the hall with the atmosphere of an occasion that had been building for 3 days and had arrived at its peak. The goblet stood at the front, its blue-white flame steady and certain of itself. Cedric Diggory's name came first, the Hufflepuff table gratifyingly loud, Cedric himself receiving the recognition with the genuine modesty of someone who is actually good. Fleur Delacour walked forward from the Beauxbatons section with the composure of someone who expected this. Victor Crumb's name produced the particular noise of a crowd acknowledging competence and meaning it. Then, the goblet went still. The pause before announcing completion had a known duration. Everyone understood the rhythm of it. The goblet flared. Its flame shifted from blue-white to gold, older-looking, as though the object had changed registers entirely. 2 slips of parchment emerged simultaneously, burning at the edges with the same gold, and fell into Dumbledore's hands at the same moment. Something the goblet had never done, could only have done for one reason. Dumbledore read the first slip, then the second. Harry James Potter, he said, and Hermione Jane Granger Potter, sovereign heirs of the ancient and noble house of Potter. The hall erupted in several simultaneous directions. Cedric Diggory, from the champion's enclosure, looked at Harry and Hermione with the measured attention of someone recalibrating a competition they thought they understood. Crumb conferred in rapid undertones with Karkaroff. Madame Maxime turned to her students with the expression of someone updating a calculation. Harry leaned toward Hermione. Karkaroff's going to file a challenge. 11 minutes, Hermione said, already writing. The Durmstrang headmaster just stood up. It was 11 minutes. The challenge failed. The goblet's acceptance was itself legal confirmation. It was the tournament's supreme authority on eligibility, and it had burned gold. Karkaroff looked at the founding compact for a long time. Then, the selection stands. Madame Maxime inclined her head with the grace of someone who recognizes a complete argument. The first task was dragons. The Hungarian horntail was the largest and most temperamental of the four. Harry went low, toward the arena floor, toward the packed earth beneath the horntail's feet. Hermione went to the eastern perimeter. The horntail tracked them both, processing the split, making a calculation. Harry began the full arena transfiguration, not a section, all of it, the packed earth converting to a frictionless surface beneath the dragon's feet, while Hermione erected a contained force space around the nesting site from the perimeter. 5 overlaid charms causing the dragon's fire to refract back toward its source at an angle that surprised the horntail enormously. The dragon, finding its footing unreliable, and its fire doing something unexpected, sat down with the expression of a creature that has encountered a situation it has no protocol for, and has decided that sitting is the appropriate response while it thinks. Harry walked to the egg, picked it up, walked back. 31 seconds from entry to retrieval. In the champion's enclosure, Victor Krum watched them exit and turned to Cedric Diggory. They politely confused it, Krum said. That's one way to describe it, Cedric said, watching Hermione close her notebook with the expression of someone who has finished an interesting task and is moving to the next one. In my first year, I could not do the floor. I don't believe it's a first-year technique, Cedric said, with considerable understatement. The second task produced something none of the tournament organizers had anticipated. A diplomatic agreement that hadn't existed in 4 centuries. James had spent years building relationships with magical creatures, which looked from the outside like eccentricity and was in practice the difference between a crisis and a conversation. The Merchieftain of the Hogwarts Lake had been corresponding with him for years through a water-sealed message system Renus had developed, extremely slow, ceremonially demanding, reliable in the way of things still in use 8 centuries after their invention. The Merchieftain's concern was not the hostages. It was the Lake Governance Charter, the section of the school's founding compact outlining the school's obligations to the merfolk in exchange for use of the lake's water table, obligations not honored or acknowledged since the 16th century. Harry and Hermione went into the lake together, using Hermione's modified bubblehead charm, a pressure equalization variant allowing full mobility at depth. Harry handled the Merchieftain in the diplomatic register. Hermione documented every aspect of the charter discussion, asked 12 clarifying questions, and drafted a renewed agreement outline in the margins of her waterproofed notebook. They surfaced 47 minutes later holding a signed protocol between Hogwarts and the merfolk. They had also retrieved the other champions' hostages on the way back, because leaving them there once the diplomatic discussion was complete had seemed, as Hermione explained to the judges, unnecessarily theatrical. Luna Lovegood, a second year with silver eyes who observed things other people missed and said what she saw without self-consciousness, found Hermione in the library the week after. You wrote them a treaty, Luna said. It was not a question, a protocol, pending formal ratification. And you brought the hostages back. It would have been inefficient not to. Luna considered her for a moment. Most people competing in a tournament to win aren't also trying to fix 400-year-old governance failures. Most people aren't in this tournament for the same reason we are, Hermione said. Luna nodded as though this confirmed something she had already suspected, sat down across from Hermione, and opened her own book upside down, and began reading it that way. You can sit here, Hermione said after a moment. I know, Luna said. Thank you. The maze fell in 40 minutes. Designed to test individual newt-level navigation and defense, it had never been designed for 2 people working as a unit. Harry's environmental transfiguration clearing physical obstacles, while Hermione's ward dissolution sequence worked through enchanted barriers at a speed the maze's responsive magic couldn't match. They used no verbal communication. 10 years of shared training was faster than speech and more precise. When they reached the Triwizard Cup, Harry stopped. He held his hand 6 inches from the handle and read the portkey destination pull, a skill Lily had spent 2 summers teaching him. What he read in this one was the code of a place where violent magic had been performed recently and repeatedly. That's not a destination, Hermione said. the diagnostic chain already running from her left hand. That's a trap. They set the cup down. Harry looked at it sitting on the grass. This object that in a different life, a world where no one had prepared, would have taken him somewhere he could not have returned from. He looked at it for a moment with the understanding of someone who knows exactly what a thing was designed to do to them. Patronus, Hermione said, and a silver otter was already moving through the maze air toward the spectators' enclosure. In the stands, James Potter received it and was already moving. By the summer before Harry's 5th year, 5 Horcruxes had been destroyed. The ring, in a controlled working at Potter Manor years earlier. The diary in 2nd year. The locket the previous spring, after Snape solved the final substrate problem with a modification so elegant that Lily read his solution 3 times before writing back, "This is correct. How long did it take you?" He replied, 4 months. The girl would have had it in 6 weeks. The diadem, retrieved from the Room of Hidden Things by Hermione in 3rd year, identified by cold resonance reading, contained, brought to the manor where Nicholas Flamel had attended at Lily's invitation with the delighted seriousness of an extraordinarily old man given a genuinely interesting problem. The cup had required goblin cooperation and 3 years of careful diplomatic groundwork by James, and the goblins had assisted with a precision and complete lack of sentimentality that he found professionally satisfying. Nagini remained, somewhere with Voldemort, wherever he had been reconstructing himself, and the soul fragment in Harry's scar remained. The last one, the most careful, the one Lily and Snape had been working toward for 4 years and had reached in midsummer before 5th year, something they were both prepared to call ready. The procedure happened at Potter Manor, in the ritual room on a long afternoon, when the light through the Highland windows had gone gold. Harry lay on the stone table with his eyes open and his breathing at the rhythm Remus had spent 2 years teaching him. Not sleep, not quite meditation, but the deliberate stillness of someone who has chosen to be entirely present in a difficult moment. His magical core as quiet as he could make it, which was very quiet, because he had been training for this requirement since he was 9 years old, and Lily told him what was in his scar, and he had spent the years between then and now deciding how he was going to be in this moment. He had decided, still, present, trusting his mother's hands. Lily stood at his right side, Snape at his left. The Fractura Anima sequence required 2 casters and a ritual bond anchor. The bond between Lily and Harry was what would allow the working to distinguish between the fragment and Harry himself. Without it, the spell could not identify what to remove. With it, it had a guide older and more precise than any diagnostic charm. James was in the corner. He had positioned himself there before the procedure began and had not moved, doing what he did when situations required stillness, and he was not by nature still. Weight on both feet, arms at his sides, face composed, using every resource he had to maintain it. Hermione stood beside him. Her notebook was closed, which was how you knew it was serious. Lily began. The Fractura Anima sequence was not dramatic. It operated at the level of magical substrate rather than surface. From the outside, it simply looked like Lily with her hands positioned above Harry's scar, speaking in a low, continuous voice, the old Latin from the Potter grimoire's deepest sections. Snape mirrored her from the left, his contributions interweaving in the counter-rhythm the substrate approach required, one caster disrupting the anchor, the other maintaining the boundary preventing the disruption from spreading into Harry's own core. They had rehearsed the sequence 40 times in the months before this. Their timing was exact. The fragment resisted, expected. A Horcrux that had resided in a living host for nearly 15 years had rooted, not deeply, the containment working had prevented that, but enough that extraction was not clean. Lily felt it through the blood anchor. Cold, stubborn wrongness, pulling against the working like a hook against a line. She adjusted the sequence. Snape felt the adjustment and matched it without breaking cadence. 4 years of collaborative magical work distilled into one moment of professional synchrony. The fragment began to loosen. Harry felt it as cold moving through the scar, and then deeper, the sensation of something separating from tissue that had grown around it, like a splinter working free of healed skin. He kept his breathing even. He kept his core still. He had known since he was 9 this moment was coming. The fragment released, cold going out of the scar like a tide withdrawing. Complete, all at once, and then simply gone. The working finished. Lily withdrew her hands. Snape stepped back. Harry sat up. He put his hand to his forehead. The scar was still there. It would always be there, but the cold that had lived beneath it since before his memory was simply not present anymore. The space where it had been was warm, ordinary, his. Lily held him for a long time, her hands on the back of his head the way they had been when he was 11 months old, and she had carried him out of Godric's hollow into the dark. He was 15 years old and taller than she was, and he leaned into it anyway, because it was the right thing to do. In the corner, James was not succeeding at being quiet about being overwhelmed. He had known this about himself going in, and had positioned himself by the wall specifically so that if he failed, there was something behind him. He used it. Hermione put her hand on his arm. He covered it with his, and said nothing. Voldemort returned in October. Without Harry's blood, the graveyard trap had been defused, Barty Crouch Jr. was in Ministry custody, and the specific ritual planned was unavailable. He used a variation requiring different components. What returned was weakened, functional but not what it would have been. He came back to find that 5 of his Horcruxes had been destroyed without his awareness, and that the soul fragment he had expected to find in Harry Potter's scar had simply ceased to exist. In the moment of that absence, he understood the scope of what had been happening while he was reconstructing himself. He moved anyway, because Voldemort's only response to obstacles had always been to go through them. Snape's network was faster than Voldemort's reconstituted inner circle anticipated, partly because that inner circle was rebuilt from people who had spent 15 years not practicing operational security. The Marauder Regency knew within 2 days. James rebuilt the Order of the Phoenix that winter, not under Dumbledore's command structure alone, though Dumbledore was present and his experience genuinely useful, and James was not too proud to use useful things. The order James built was better coordinated, built on a decade of relationships with the Aurora Corps, the Wizengamots Reform faction, the Goblins, and the Merfolk. Tonks, a metamorph magus in her mid-20s, with exceptional instincts and a fearlessness that complemented rather than undermined her competence, served as primary field liaison between the Order and the Aurors, running coordination with a speed and adaptability that made her indispensable within weeks. Moody, the real Moody who had spent the previous year imprisoned in his own trunk, while an impersonator attended Hogwarts in his name, contributed strong opinions about the Hogsmeade strategy at significant volume and with considerable tactical accuracy. Voldemort chose Hogsmeade, symbolic and strategic simultaneously, the oldest wizarding settlement in Britain, the village adjacent to the school. He moved on it in early spring with 31 Death Eaters and Nagini. The Order of the Phoenix was already there, every exit sealed, every escape route covered by Aurors who had drilled the containment coordination until it ran smoothly. The village's civilians had been quietly evacuated the previous afternoon. Tonks had handled this personally, going door to door with a cover story about a ministry infrastructure inspection delivered with complete conviction. The Death Eaters arrived to a village that was already a cage. What followed was not clean. War does not become clean because you prepare for it. Several Order members were injured, 2, seriously. A curse caught the post office and the building came down in a spectacular and alarming way that Sirius barely had time to contain with a shielding charm from 40 feet away. Moody took a curse to the shoulder and kept fighting, because that was what Moody did. But every exchange happened on ground the Order had chosen, in conditions the Order had set, against opponents reacting rather than acting. Voldemort came through the north approach and found Harry and Hermione waiting. Not alone. The Order was positioned behind them, the perimeter held, Sirius on the left flank and James on the right. But at the center of the village square, in the geography of the confrontation, it was Harry and Hermione in Voldemort's path, and what he saw when he looked at them was not what he had planned for. He had planned for one child, isolated, ignorant, positioned for a sacrifice he had built everything around. 2 stood in his way, 15 years old, entirely unafraid. He attacked Harry first. The killing curse, his most reliable instrument, the one that had ended everything that had ever stood against him. He cast it with the full force of 50 years of dark magic practice. Harry did not dodge. He activated the Phantom Heart, the Potter's deepest art, the Peverell tradition of deceiving death, the temporary externalization of his magical core, producing a double authentic enough to register as real to every form of magical detection. The double stepped forward. The curse struck it. The double dissolved. The curse rebounded. In a different life, Voldemort would have survived this. He had survived it once before, because 7 Horcruxes had anchored his soul to the mortal plane, through 7 separate objects, and the rebounded curse had found something to hold on to. He had none now. The rebounded force hit a soul with nowhere to go, nothing to hold on to, no fragment waiting in a ring or a locket, or a diary or a cup or a diadem or a snake or a scar. A soul whittled to its last coherence by 15 years of diminishment and the systematic removal of every anchor he had spent his life constructing. Tom Marvolo Riddle died in a village square in Scotland in the first light of an early spring morning, not with grandeur, not with a speech, not with the universe pausing to mark it. The body fell. The soul, with nothing holding it to the living world and nowhere in the living world it had made for itself, ceased. Nagini died 30 seconds later when Verada came up through the village's stone foundations. The covenant fulfilled. The deep-ward guardian operating below street level with the precision of a creature that had agreed to do a thing and was doing it. The last Horcrux ended. The square went quiet. Sirius found Lucius Malfoy in an alley off the north approach, hooded, the dark mark visible where his sleeve had shifted, here to watch what he had believed would be his master's triumph. "You came to watch," Sirius said. Lucius said nothing. "The Aurors will process you. The mark is evidence of voluntary presence at an armed assault. The imperious defense does not survive a second review when the defendant is found in a cloak in an alley at the scene." He signaled. The Aurors came. Tonks, across the square, caught Sirius's eye and gave him a look combining professional satisfaction with the relief of someone who had been running on pure adrenaline for 4 hours, and was now permitted to acknowledge that fact. Neville Longbottom was sitting against a low wall, with a cut above his eye being attended to by Tonks, looking extremely alert in the manner of someone who has just discovered something significant about themselves. Ron Weasley was beside him, equally cut about, equally alert, talking in low voices with the ease of people who have been through something together and are finding their way back to ordinary. Luna Lovegood walked through the aftermath at her characteristic unhurried pace, her silver eyes reading the scene with an attention that belonged entirely to her. She stopped beside Harry. "It worked," she said. "Yes," he said. She nodded, as though confirming a calculation she had made some time ago, and walked on. In the center of the square, Harry stood in the silence the battle had left behind. His magical core was back in his body, and everything was exactly where it should be. The thing Lily had told him would happen, and which he had believed, and which he was now experiencing as physical reality rather than theory. The scar on his forehead was a mark, just his. Hermione was beside him with her notebook open, because the record mattered, and because that was Hermione. James reached them from the right flank and put one hand on Harry's shoulder without saying anything immediately, which was how James expressed things that were larger than words. Harry leaned into it slightly, which was how Harry received them. Lily came from the north entrance, where she had been holding the ward boundary. She looked at her son, then at the space where Voldemort had been, then at her son again. "It's done," Harry said. "It's done," she agreed, and her voice was entirely steady, which cost her something she would never fully account for. Hermione looked up from her notebook. "Nagin?" "Verada," Harry said. Hermione wrote it down. She closed the notebook. Sirius appeared at James's left shoulder. "Well," Sirius said. "Yes," James said. "We should tell Remus." The Patronus already went. "Right." A pause. "It worked. All of it," James said. He looked at his children standing in the center of the square, already talking, Harry describing something, Hermione writing, the rhythm between them so practiced it was invisible, the way all the most durable things become invisible when they have been working long enough. "The door held," Sirius said. James Potter looked at his children. "The door held," he said. In the year that followed, Britain grew quiet in a way it had not been in 3 decades. Not the silence of exhaustion, the silence of a country that had finished something and was learning, with the particular awkwardness of institutions that have run on emergency protocols for too long, how to function without the emergency. It was not a perfect quiet. It had the texture of real things, contested, ongoing, occasionally loud in committee rooms and Wizengamot sessions, and the letters column of a daily prophet now operating under an editorial oversight statute that was Sirius's 4th legislative filing of the year. But it was quiet, and the quiet was real. The ministry under its new minister, selected from a short list James had contributed names to, deliberately not including his own, because he had no interest in running a government, and considerable interest in the government being run correctly, was a recognizably different institution from the one that had spent 20 years being Cornelius Fudge's primary mechanism for avoiding difficult decisions. The Muggle-born Registration Act, which Umbridge had spent 2 decades preparing the groundwork for, had been preemptively blocked by a permanent legal challenge filed jointly by House Potter and House Black. Rooted in the founding compact and upheld by the Wizengamot's legal panel in a ruling thorough enough that no subsequent administration would find a workable angle around it. The Dementor population at Azkaban was being reduced, slower than Sirius wanted, faster than the prison administration had initially proposed, approximately where real change ends up when the right pressure is applied with sufficient patience. A governance review committee met monthly. Its recommendations were being implemented. Remus Lupin had tenure at Hogwarts. He was the finest defense against the dark arts teacher the school had seen in a generation, which the students knew immediately, and which McGonagall, headmistress now in the role the school had been waiting years for her to hold, had noted in his first annual assessment in language that was, for her, notably warm. Nobody had tried to remove him. The werewolf registry was under the same committee review as Azkaban, because Sirius had attached both issues in the same filing, and the committee's chair had accepted the connection as legally coherent, which it was. Snape was still head of Slytherin, still exacting, still producing exceptional results through methods that would not appear in any pedagogy handbook. McGonagall kept a private tally of occasions when he had awarded full marks to a Gryffindor. The fourth instance had involved a 7th-year essay on substrate disruption theory, returned with 2 pages of annotation and a final note. Submit this to the journal. Do it before you leave school. SS. Draco Malfoy was not the person he had been in first year. Not a dramatic transformation. 17 was not an age at which people finished, but he was less certain of the specific certainties his childhood had given him, and uncertainty was the beginning of thinking. Theodore Knott had joined the Wizengamot's Youth Advisory Program in 6th year and was, everyone agreed, remarkably effective. Several senior members had privately noted he reminded them of a young Sirius Black, a comparison that would have appalled Knott if he had known, and that was entirely accurate. Ron Weasley had grown into someone remarkable in ways that had nothing to do with the war, which was usually how remarkable people developed, by being given room and trust, and the company of people who challenged them without diminishing them. He had, as Hermione had once observed while ostensibly not looking up from a book, one of the best instincts for reading people she had ever encountered, not a thing he had been taught, and therefore the more extraordinary. Dan and Jean Granger came to Potter Manor for the summer solstice celebration, as they had every year since Hermione was 3. The manor was full in the way it became for that occasion, Weasleys in various configurations, Remus and Tonks with their son Teddy, who was 8 months old, and already demonstrating a preference for turquoise hair, several order members for whom the celebration had become an annual fixture, Nicholas Flamel, who attended every year, and stayed exactly 4 hours and spent 3 of them in the library with whoever wanted to discuss alchemical theory, which was always Hermione, and increasingly Harry. Jean Granger found Hermione in the courtyard before dinner. The hug was brief and fierce, and communicated everything it needed to. The gold star on Hermione's wrist was glowing faintly, the living ward registering what it always registered when she was happy, a warmth that had first appeared in a great hall full of real candles in the last days of July, 14 years ago. Jean had always noticed. She had first noticed it at the second summer celebration, when Hermione was 4 years old and running across the manor grounds with Harry, and Sirius was losing a race to both of them. The star on her daughter's wrist had been bright enough to see from across the garden. She did not mention it. The expression on her daughter's face, complete, certain, anchored, was everything she had asked for on the night she had sat across from a red-headed witch in her living room and tried to read the quality of what was being offered. She had read it correctly. The face across the courtyard was the proof. Dan appeared beside her with 2 cold glasses and pressed one into her hand. Following her gaze to their daughter, she submitted the paper, he said. I know. She owled me when it was accepted. International Journal of Ancient Magic. He said it the way he said things he was proud of, quietly, as a statement of fact, letting the fact carry its own weight. She's 16. She'll be 17 in September. Still, Dan said. Still, Jean agreed. On the roof of Potter Manor, in the long evening light of the solstice, Harry and Hermione sat with their backs against the parapet and the open sky above them. The enchanted ceiling was visible through the roof hatch below. And in the alignment that only happened on the longest day of the year, the two skies matched so precisely the boundary between them disappeared. Painted stars and real stars, indistinguishable. Harry's scar had turned silver white since the extraction, the irritated red of its first 15 years cooling and settling. It was simply a mark now, part of his face. He barely noticed it, which was the truest measure of the change. Hermione had a book face down on her knee, the position that meant she was also thinking about something that competed with the reading, a thing she did when the something else was important enough. "You know what I keep thinking about," Harry said. "Any number of things," she said. Dumbledore, in first year. He'd spent 40 years preparing for one child to face Voldemort. Hermione picked up her book, set it down again. And what if he'd just found two? Harry looked at the stars. That's the whole secret of it. Don't make one person carry the world. Hermione was quiet for a long moment. He didn't think of that. She said, "No, we did." The silence between them was the silence of two people who had been in the same thing together for 15 years and had no need to perform understanding of each other, because the understanding was simply there, had always been there, was part of the structure rather than something they produced for each other. Below them, the celebration continued, Sirius's voice audible over everyone else's, because a man in his late 30s who had survived something and decided that survival was reason enough to be as loud as he wanted at gatherings was going to be loud. James's laugh, somewhere beneath that, the laugh that meant Sirius had said something James would officially deny finding funny. Lily's voice lower and harder to locate, which meant she was in the middle of a real conversation rather than the periphery of a social one. Harry looked at the stars. He thought about an infant in a great hall, 14 years ago, reaching toward a painted ceiling, and one star brightening. He thought about a girl in a bookshop, 3 years old, arranging picture books by the spectrum of light and finding the result exactly right. He thought about a study with charts on every wall, a practice room with a stone that wanted to be a coin, a platform at King's Cross where the world had rearranged itself around two people who walked its length without asking permission from anyone. He thought about a corridor in Godric's Hollow where the door held. "Hermione," he said. Thank you for being the person who walked across that hall." She looked at him with the expression she wore when something had landed in the part of her that moved slower than her mind. Not analysis, not annotation, but what was simply true. "You pulled me into the ritual," she said. "I just walked toward it. You didn't have to." "I was 3 years old," she said. "I didn't know that yet." A pause. "I'm glad you didn't know," Harry said. "So am I," she said. She opened her book. He looked at the stars. Below them, the party went on. Warm, loud, entirely ordinary in the way of a family that had built its ordinariness, deliberately, as an act of intention rather than accident, and knew its value exactly because they understood what it had cost. In the great hall of Potter Manor, after the guests had gone and the children were on the roof and the fire had settled to the low warmth of late evening, James and Lily sat in the chairs nearest the hearth. The ceiling showed the actual night sky, every star in its place, the summer constellations moving in their slow, ancient way above the Scottish Highlands. The painted sky below and the real sky above aligned on this particular night with such precision the boundary dissolved. The hearth fire added a log without being asked, and settled. "He was right about one thing," James said. Lily looked at him. Dumbledore, when he said love was the oldest magic, that it was the thing Voldemort couldn't understand. "He wasn't wrong about that," she said. "No, he just thought it worked in one direction. One sacrifice, one child, one moment of love spent and finished. And you think otherwise." "Love builds," James said. "It doesn't spend itself. It echoes. What you did in that nursery, it didn't end when Harry grew up. It's still running. It's in the wards and in him, and in what he is to Hermione and what they are together, and what they've done with it." Lily was quiet for a long moment. "That's what he missed," she said. "He saw the sacrifice and he thought that was the magic, the dying. But the magic was the living," James said, "everything that came after." Outside, on the roof, two voices, one asking, one answering. The sound came through the old stone walls the way good sounds come through old walls, completely, without effort, as though the house had been built to carry exactly this. Lily leaned against James. He put his arm around her. Above them, the stars moved in their slow, indifferent way. ancient and unimpressed by the things that happened beneath them. The small, bright fact of a family in a house in the Scottish Highlands, on a summer night, alive and whole and together, which was not a small thing. It was, in fact, the whole point. The door had held. Everything else had followed. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.